It is Saturday morning cartoons, and here is a cartoon drawn by Aleister Crowley himself, a self-portrait with quite a forehead on that guy. Anyway, and he's bearing the sort of phallic A for for Aleister that he was famous for. This is has become, I guess, a relatively rare edition of this book anyway, The Confessions of Aleister Crowley. And it was edited by John Simons and Kenneth Grant many years ago. This is from Hill and Wang, believe it or not. It's a really thick book. It's got that drawing on the inside there. Let's see what year this was published. 1969. And I think it was given, I guess the date, it was given to me around 1974. I think even before I joined the OTO, a dear friend of mine, I guess, had no use for this and gave it to me because she knew I was getting into Aleister Crowley. Anyway, I would like to, today is Crowley's birthday. Okay, he was born on this date, October 12th, in 1875. Now, 1875 was also the date that the Theosophical Society, that Blavatsky and the gang started up the Theosophical Society. And I believe it was also the date that Alphonse Louis Constant, or Eliphas Levi, died. I may be mistaken about that, so I'm sure someone will correct me on Levi's death date, but Crowley considered himself, at least in some manner or another, the reincarnation, or at least carrying on the work of salvaging the reputation of magic as a legitimate spiritual art and science. Be that as it may, throughout Crowley's writings, he gives certain accounts of his early childhood. And because this is an autobiography, actually, he calls it an autohagiography, which is the autobiography of a saint. And he wasn't really, he lived a lot of years after he wrote this. So here it says, an autohagiography. And God knows what it would be if he had continued this right up to his death. But anyway, he writes a little bit about his childhood, and that's what I want to share with you today, because the book is hard to get, and unless you have it, you haven't read this little section I'm about to read to you. And there's a couple of amusing things. Like many of us, okay, who remember very, very early memories, Crowley shows that he remembers his own baptism and things like that. And it's not particularly unusual, because I remember I have many crib memories, and I lump it up to the fact that I was allowed to slumber in half sleep uh, for a good part of the years that most kids start to walk and stuff because I had a hip disease and stuff. So I was alone with my thoughts and pre-linguistic thought patterns. You know, once you learn to talk and once you're mobile, you are aware of outside things. Uh, but until you've got a language to run that inner monologue in your head, the inner monologue is all images. And I was privileged, okay, to spend a little extra time as the rest of my brain was kind of physically, growing and consolidating. I had time to dwell on those visual images and have them impressed to a part of my brain that I actually remember them clearly. So it seems that Crowley, for some reason or other, also at least had episodes of that he tries to describe here. So I'm just going to read a couple of pages. Again, I'm reading from the Confessions of Aleister Crowley. And it's chapter 1. There's a beautiful prologue. It's a great book. Okay, when I read it, I knew this guy is absolutely, he's crazy, but he's so funny too. Okay, and I had to think about this. I was like 20, I don't know, 26, 27 years old when I was reading this. I had to read it with a dictionary by my side. Okay. But anyway, my eyes are a little funny this morning. Anyway, Edward Crowley, and the footnote says, the younger. Edward Crowley, that's his father he's talking about. The younger, 1834 to 1887. Edward Crowley, the wealthy scion of the race of Quakers, was the father of a son. Born at 30 Clendon Square, Leamington, Warwickshire, on the 12th day of October, 1875, between 11 and 12 at night. Leo was just rising at the time, as nearly as can be ascertained. The branch of the family of Crowley to which this man belonged had been settled in England since Tudor times. In the days of Bad Queen Bess, there was a Bishop Crowley who wrote epigrams in the style of Martial. One of them, the only one I know, runs like this. The bods of the stews be all turned out, but I think they inhabit all England throughout. I'm not sure what that means, but the stews might be the Stuarts. Okay. But anyway, and the bods, the Stuart poets. But who knows? I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. I cannot find the modern book which quotes this as a footnote and have not been able to trace the original volume. The Crowleys are, however, of Celtic origin. The name O'Crowley is common in the southwest Ireland. And the Breton family of, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce this because it's French, D-Q-U-E, K, R-O-U, Ru, Wadil, I-L-L-E. Please, my Facebook friends in France, correct my pronunciation. A DuQuette should be ashamed of himself. Well, that family gave England a Duchess of Portsmouth, or de Creval, of the same stock. Legend will have it that the then head of the family came to England with the Earl of Richmond and helped make him king on Bosworth Field. Edward Crowley was educated, this is his father still, Edward Crowley was educated as an engineer, but never practiced his profession. He was devoted to religion and became a follower of John Nelson Darby, the founder of the Plymouth Brethren. The fact reveals a stern logician, for the sect is characterized by a refusal to compromise. It insists on the literal interpretation of the Bible as the exact words of the Holy Ghost. He married in 1874, one may assume. Crowley was born in 1875. He's casting subtle aspersions on his legitimacy. He married in 1874, one may presume, Emily Bertha Bishop of a Devon and Somerset family. Her father had died and her brother Tom Bond Bishop had come to London to work in the civil service. The important points about the woman are that her schoolmates called her the little Chinese girl, and that she painted in watercolors with admirable taste, destroyed by academic training, and that her powerful natural instincts were suppressed by religion to the point that she became, after her husband's death, a brainless bigot of the most narrow, logical, and inhumane type. Yet there was always a struggle, and she was really distressed almost daily at finding herself obliged by her religion to perform acts of the most senseless atrocity. Now there's pictures of both his father and his mother in here, and when I'm through with my little excerpt today, I'll try to thumb through and find them for you. Her firstborn son, aforesaid, meaning himself, was remarkable from the moment of his arrival. He bore on his body three most important distinguishing marks of a Buddha. He was tongue-tied, and on the second day of his incarnation, the surgeon cut the frenum linguae. He also had the characteristic membrane, which necessitated an operation for phimosis. Some 3 lustres later, I guess that's a 5-year period, he had the center. Oh, yeah. In other words, he was circumcised at the age of 15. Lastly, he had upon the center of his heart 4 hairs curling from left to right in the exact form of a swastika. He was baptized by the names Edward Alexander, the latter being the surname of an old friend of his father's, deeply loved by him for his holiness of his life. By the Plymouth Brethren standards, one may suppose. It probably seems probable that the boy was deeply impressed by being told, at what age, before 6 probably, he says, it does not appear, that Alexander means the helper of men. He's still giving himself passionately to the task, despite the intellectual cynicism inseparable from intelligence after one has reached 40. But the extraordinary fact connected to his baptismal ceremony is this. As the Plymouth Brethren practice infant baptism by immersion, it must have taken place in the first 3 months of his life. Yet he has a perfectly clear visual recollection of the scene. It took place in the bathroom on the first floor of the house in which he was born. Now, when they say bathroom, they really mean bathroom, as opposed to toilet. Okay, the bathroom. So it was probably a room with a big, beautiful bathtub. Okay. He remembers the shape of the room, the disposal of its appointments, the little group of brethren surrounding him, and the surprise of finding himself dressed in a long white garment, being suddenly dipped and lifted from the water. He also had clear auditory remembrance of the words spoken solemnly over him. Though they meant nothing, he was impressed by the particular tone. It is not impossible that this gave him an all but unquenchable dislike for the cold plunge, and at the same time a vivid passion for ceremonial speech. These two qualities have played highly important parts in his development. This baptism, by the way, though it never worried him, proved a peril to the soul of another. Now, Crowley's going to digress for a second, okay, talking about the circumstances of his baptism much later in life having terrible effects on another person. And I'm going to join you to that digression. This baptism, by the way, though it never occurred to him, proved a peril to the soul of another. When his wife's conduct compelled him to insist upon divorcing him, a formality, Crowley's wife insisted on divorcing him, okay? And this is Rose, okay, Rose Kelly Crowley. A formality as meaningless as their marriage. And she became insane shortly afterwards. Yeah. An eminent masochist named Colonel Gromley, R.A.M.C., dead previously, then and since, lay in wait for her at the asylum gates to marry her. The trouble was that he was inclined, among his other intellectual lucinae, a devotion to the Romish superstition. He feared damnation if he married a divorcee, dipsomaniac, and non-prava partial dementia. Okay. Rose had a terrible alcohol problem. Okay. I don't want to cast any more mentally ill aspersions on her than it was so severe that it led to a severe case of dementia. Okay, and she was in an asylum right over on Asylum Street in central London. Okay. But the other guy who wanted to marry her, that waited at the asylum gates to marry her as soon as he divorced, Crowley refers to as the poor mollusk, asked Crowley the details of his baptism. He wrote back that he had been baptized in the name of the, quote, Holy Trinity. Now it appeared that had these actual had these actual words be used, he was a pagan, his marriage void, and Lola, Zaza, their child, a bastard, and his wife a light o' love. Crowley tried to help the wretched worm, but alas, he remembered too well the formula, I baptize thee, Edward Alexander, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So the gallant colonel had to fork out for a dispensation from Rome. Now, Crowley himself squandered a lot of cash in one way or another, but he never fell so far as to waste a farthing on a 3-card trick or a 3-god trick. In other words, oh well, anyway, that was a digression. And at the very beginning of his autohagiography, it gets you used to sometimes pages and pages of digressions. Nevertheless, don't let that discourage you. It's a fabulous book. He also has the clearest visualization of some of the people who surrounded him in the first 6 years of his life, which were spent at Leamington and the neighborhood, which he has never revisited. In particular, there was an orange-colored old lady named Mrs. Carey, who used to bring him oranges. His first memory of speech is his remark, "K, orange." But this, however, is remembered because he was told of the latter. And the footnote says he couldn't pronounce his R's for a long time, like Chinese. Okay. But he is in full conscious memory of the dining room of the house, its furniture, pictures with their arrangement. He also remembers various country walks, one especially through green fields in which a perambulator figures, so he can remember being in a baby carriage. The main street of Leamington and the Leam with its weir, he has loved weirs ever since. Guy's Cliff at Warwick and the castle with its terrace and the white peacocks, all these as clear as if he had seen them last week. He recalls no other room in the house except his own bedroom, and that only because he came to himself one night to find a fire lighted, a steam kettle going, a strange woman present, an atmosphere of anxiety, and a feeling of fever, for he had an attack of bronchitis. He remembers his first governess, Miss Arkell, a gray-haired lady with traces of beard on her large, flat face and a black dress of which he calls bombasine, although to this hour he does not know what bombasine may mean, and thinks that the dress was of alpaca or even maybe of smooth, hard silk. And he remembers the first indication of his mind was of a logical and scientific order. Ladies, we'll now kindly skip a page while I lay facts before a select audience of lawyers, doctors, ministers of religion. Are the ladies out of the room? Here comes his naughty tale. Mrs., okay, and that's plural, Miss, Cowper consisted of Sister Susan and Sister Emma. The one large, rosy, and dry, like an overgrown radish. The other small, pink and moist, like Tennell's mock turtle. Both were Plymouth sisters, old maids. They were very repulsive to the boy, who had never since liked calf's head, though partial to similar dishes, or been able to hear the name Susan or Emma without disgust. One day he said something to his mother which elicited from her the curious anatomical assertion, "Ladies have no legs." Shortly afterwards, when Mrs. Cowper were dining with the family, he disappeared from his chair. There must have been some slight commotion on deck, leading to the question of his whereabouts. But at that moment, a still small voice came from beneath the table. "Mama, Mama, Susan and Sister Emma are not ladies." This dedication was perfectly genuine, but in the following incident, the cynical may perhaps trace the root of a certain sardonic humor. The child, he's talking about himself, okay? The child was wont to indicate his views when silence seemed discretion by facial gestures. Several people were rash enough to tell him not to make grimaces, as he might be stuck like that. He would reply with an air of enlightenment after long meditation, "So that accounts for it." Okay, those are a couple little anecdotes in honor of Crowley's birthday, October 12th, 1875. I joined the OTO, or I was initiated into the OTO 100 years later, in November of 1975. Anyway, there were still people alive that knew Crowley. As a matter of fact, 2 of them initiated me. Anyway, until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Happy Beastmas.